the rule of demonic powers. The composer Weber's words about one of two elements of the overture to his opera Der Freischütz, the other one being the life of a hunter. And when the demonic powers spookily crept in at the start from nothing, and then grew and grew with such controlled tension in Carlos Kleiber's very first official recording here, they so vividly set the scene that the public response just to this beginning alone was intense, just like the response had been when Kleiber had inspired the orchestra at the rehearsals in a completely unique way, as he did whenever and wherever he conducted.
He said, you have to imagine the Caspar David Friedrich painting. This forest, maybe in Bavaria, and a mist, and behind the mist, the moon, it's all its clarity. And this has to be the kind of sound you've got to visualize in your head. It's got to be an expansive sound. It's got to have something large and romantic and full.
Peter Jonas was remembering Carlos Kleiber's rehearsal of the overture to Weber's opera Der Freischütz with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra when he guest conducted them in 1978. That was just 5 years after he'd made this recording of the complete opera, which created such an exceptionally strong impression on the musical world. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it created a sensation. There was some astonishing virtuosity, and above all, Kleiber brought the story and the action to life with sizzling theatrical atmosphere. For instance, the scene in the Wolf's Glen at the end of the second act is really startling. It's the dead of night, and Caspar, a hunter, is summoning up Zamiel, the devil. As he lays out a circle of black boulders to surround a dead skull, the voices of invisible spirits rise up around him. The impact of that, dramatically and vocally, came from Carlos Kleiber's intense demands in rehearsal and his brilliant talent at realizing them, in his communication to all the performers, and in his physical conducting.
The intellect was absolutely astonishing, and then to have the technique and the musical taste and all the rest of it to go with it, and the crazy personality which changes so dramatically from bar to bar. I mean, you can see the face changing when the chord changes.
We're still in the Wolf's Glen in the second act of Der Freischütz. Caspar is in trouble. He sold his soul to Zamiel in exchange for some magic bullets that he needed, and now his time is up, and the next day Zamiel will claim him and take him down to hell. So Caspar has tricked his fellow hunter Max to come with him to the Wolf's Glen, ostensibly to forge some more magic bullets, this time for Max, who needs them. But, in fact, he intends to substitute Max in place of himself, so that Zamiel will take Max's soul instead. Caspar pleads with Zamiel to give him time to bring him the new sacrifice, but Zamiel will not extend the deadline. He'll accept Max instead of him, but it must be tomorrow. Morgen, oder du. Tomorrow, him or you.
Dir allein, was findet sich? Doch schenkst du Frist, und wieder auf 3 Jahr bring ich dir zur Beute nah. Es sei! Morgen, oder du!
A striking part of this recording was its imaginatively theatrical sound picture. Of course, that was the achievement of the recording producer and the balance engineer. But Carlos Kleiber's involvement was also a very important element. He was meticulous about every aspect of everything he was involved with in his work, in the recording studio, in the opera house, and in the concert hall. In these respects, and in some stylistic ways, he resembled his father, Erich Kleiber, who was one of the most influential conducting figures of the earlier part of the 20th century. But there were great differences between the two. Carlos was far more temperamental and volatile, and he was an improvisatory conductor, which his father was not. And the entire matter of his becoming a conductor had been a source of great tension between father and son. Erich had not wanted Carlos to become a conductor, not one bit. And that was partly because he was very critical of the conducting profession, and indeed the entire business side of the music profession. Erich Kleiber wanted his son to have a secure career, and so Carlos studied law, chemistry, and physics.
He was superbly well educated. He had gone to the Eidgenössische Technische Hochschule in Zurich. It's one of the top engineering schools for physics, quantum physics in the world, and architecture as well. And it is an amazing university. And he was educated there, and it is the foundation of his world. Before he died, he went to visit Zurich, just before he died, because he wanted to see his student haunts and hang around the Technische Hochschule and walk around the places where he spent his student days. And those were the formative days.
Nevertheless, after 1.5 semesters at the Technical University in Zurich, Carlos Kleiber's passion for music gave him the strength to confront his father, and he persuaded him that he should study conducting. He began as an opera repetiteur in Munich, and then gradually he graduated to Kapellmeister posts in Düsseldorf, Zurich and Stuttgart. But that was not the life that he wanted. Regularity was not his tune. Before the recording of Der Freischütz appeared, he had started to make a very strong impression as a guest at the Bavarian State Opera, but he was starting to opt out of a regular professional life, and he was conducting less and less. The recording of Der Freischütz that made him suddenly so very famous vitally helped him to opt out for most of the time. He had no management now, and he chose only to conduct on relatively few occasions, always demanding enormous amounts of rehearsal and more.
He was completely different from anybody else when it came to the parts. He would use the parts that his father used, that he had inherited, and that he'd maybe expanded to make sure that there was the right number of desks for the orchestra. And all these long letters came about how he was going to send me the parts, and how the parts were not a master set, which the library could work from, but were the parts for every desk, for everything. And how I shouldn't be confused, because I would be the one looking after the parts. He didn't want to correspond with the library, he wanted to correspond with me, he wanted to have one Gesprächspartner. And therefore, I would have to do the work with the library. And that the parts, I shouldn't be confused, in the first violins would be first desk, second desk, third desk, fourth desk, not first desk and tutti. And that I shouldn't also be confused by the fact that the parts for the second desk would have different bowings from the parts in the first desk. And the parts for the third desk would have different bowings to the parts from the second desk. And so on and so forth to the back of the section.
It wasn't easy at all to please Carlos Kleiber, but nearly everyone wanted to please him greatly. And that, together with his exceptional talents, is how he achieved the kinds of results in his debut recording of Der Freischütz and for the remainder of his career that made him virtually a legend in his own lifetime.
I feel so privileged that I was able to play under him. The performances I did with him were locked forever in the memory, for their excitement, for their musicality, for everything.